Up next, to address the importance of the EU budget in building our future, we are delighted to welcome the Prime Minister of Croatia, Andrej Plenković. Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, dear Commissioner, dear Johannes, dear President Sandu, dear Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lagbib, dear Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal, dear Paulo, Mr. Angel, dear Enrico, dear friends, dear experts on EU budget. Thank you for the invitation to address this year's Budgets Conference, which is appropriately dedicated to looking ahead. Last time I spoke at this conference was in 2022, before Croatia joined the Schengen area, the Eurozone, the European Stability Mechanism, and from the perspective of someone that participated in the forging of the last MFF back in 2020 from the position of a Prime Minister, and the previous one from the position of the member of the European Parliament and in the Budgets Committee, I would like to share with you a few thoughts about how we in Croatia see the context and the timing of this budgetary debate. First of all, the challenging times of the past several years, coupled with the upcoming new institutional cycle and the impending start of the discussions on the EU next financial framework, demand from all of us to think more strategically about the future of EU priorities and the means how to achieve them. This is why the title of my address says that the future of the budget is the future of the European Union. And I really believe that this is how we will best reflect our priorities, both in terms of political action, in terms of our values, but also in terms of the feasibility of the realization of these objectives based on the affordable budget. Because when we discuss the budget, we are actually deciding what kind of Europe we want and need, and vice versa. The future I envisage is one in which Europe is more competitive, more resilient and more prosperous, well equipped to protect its citizens and their well-being, and with a credible and influential role at the global stage. Living in a world that has become increasingly unpredictable and complex, characterized by multiple and overlapping crises, we need to demonstrate to our citizens and businesses, as well as our partners and allies, that our union is indeed fit for such a future. Our recent experience has shown that whenever we face the new crisis, we have been able to find solutions together at the EU level. The citizens' confidence in the European Union has grown, as they have seen sure joint procurement of vaccines and the next generation EU agreed in a record time to address the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences. It was the moment of the first ever Croatian presidency of the Council, and everything that we wanted to achieve with our partners was to provide a big answer to a big problem, and we jointly managed in July of 2020. The citizens also observed the Repower EU's contribution to ensuring more energy security and independence. And in the recent MFF review, they witnessed a collective spirit of solidarity of the European Union that will be able to provide a more structured and predictable financial assistance to Ukraine, support other neighbors and partners, manage migration and external borders more efficiently, and addressed some new challenges arising from climate change or threats to our security. At the same time, this latest MFF revision has also shown that it is becoming increasingly more difficult to prioritize and to agree on our budget structure, instruments and ways to finance them. This is due to a growing number of different challenges that are more and more systemic and horizontal in nature, such as repeated shocks in supply chains, unfavorable demographic trends, irregular migration, growth and innovation gaps, or are of geopolitical significance, such as enlargement. All mentioned challenges are now the crux of our discussions on the new strategic agenda. which will define the Union's priorities for the next legislative cycle. In turn, our new strategic agenda will also shape our next multi-annual financial framework, post-2027, as a key instrument to translate our political priorities and commitments into concrete actions, providing European solutions to different challenges at European and global level. In order to achieve those objectives today, I would like to offer 3 interconnected guiding images that could shape the structure of the future EU budget and make it more fit for the world of tomorrow. First, an EU budget for a more competitive Europe based on solidarity and flexibility. Second, an EU budget that will ensure social convergence and protect the well-being of our citizens. And third, an EU budget that will enhance the European Union's role on the global level and make it more influential. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of increasingly complex challenges, the EU needs to ensure a more adequate investment capacity with the EU budget in order to strengthen its long-term competitiveness. Having in mind further unavoidable geoeconomic and geopolitical transformations exemplified by Russia's aggression against Ukraine, or war in the Middle East taking now place between Israel and Hamas, and the threat that it is wider spread, we should explore a possibility of having a more ambitious budget, anchored in solidarity and flexibility. A budget that would ensure more strategic autonomy and self-sufficiency, while keeping our openness towards the outside world. The discussion on strengthening the EU's single market and competitiveness, based on reports by fellow colleagues, Enrico is here, and we had an excellent discussion 10 days ago at the European Council, and the report that will soon to be published by Mario Draghi can help us with that to decide on policy priorities while securing a sufficient level of financing for those priorities. So what do I see as the main priorities? For sure, the twin transition, something we were supposed to be focused at already back in 2019, but we were dragged away by unexpected crises such as COVID or Russia's aggression against Ukraine and its consequences. Further enhancing Europe's energy security and independence while tackling climate change should translate into more investment into green transition. In this regard, Repower EU has already proved to be a good and targeted instrument. I have an example at home where Croatia is now using the Repower EU funds to develop pipeline networks for our regional energy hub. We have co-financed by national budget and the EU budget the LNG terminal at the island of Krk, and we are now increasing its capacity to make it useful and purposeful for Bavaria, for Austria, for Slovenia, for Hungary, for Bosnia and Herzegovina, for all of our neighbors, given the size of the capacity. It's a good example how the Repower EU is actually exacerbating the possibilities that we have at national level. At the same time, we need a clearer and more predictable legal framework to allow all low-carbon technologies to have equal access to financing in order to maintain the EU's leadership in addressing climate change. Better targeted, simplified, and more flexible investments in digital transformation are equally important, especially to reduce technological gaps with the United States and China. To that end, instruments like the important projects of common European interest should be refined further, so to allow more innovative SME and other companies to participate without unnecessary administrative burdens. This would bring more added value and more collaboration, and would enable more companies, like, for instance, first ever Croatia's unicorn Infobip, to contribute to projects of common European interest, in their case, a fascinating global communication platform of next generation. Changing geopolitical circumstances are also strongly affecting other sectors of European industry and our overall economic base. Global economic uncertainty, competition, protectionism, trade tensions, and challenges to the rules-based system are increasing. Europe is in danger of falling behind. This is why it's high time to further strengthen the link between the European industrial policy and the EU budget post-2027. After we have agreed, among others, on Zero Net Industrial Act and CHIPS Act, and to have better instruments to accompany this objective. Furthermore, we need to increase investments in research, innovation and technology, as well as to provide more incentives for cooperation of our research institutions, industries and businesses. As I said at the last European Council, I cannot agree more with Enrico Letta's proposal that the EU should develop further the idea of the fifth freedom for research, innovation and education. The moment is exactly right for that. We have such a project that we are developing with our Spanish friends. It's called the DONES project, a good example of fusion, or nuclear fusion program, which is really bringing us high ahead for clean energy. Last but not least, I believe that we need to give our agricultural policy a new, more modern, attractive and effective shape. Food security and quality, balanced territorial development, protection of natural resources and application of innovative technologies are not becoming less relevant. To the contrary. It is thus crucial to ensure adequate funds for the common agricultural policy in the next programming period in line with these objectives, while carefully reconsidering our mechanisms for cases of major and prolonged market disturbances in accordance with the lessons learned from the past few years. The EU's long-term competitiveness also rests on balanced and sustainable development, as well as social and economic convergence across the EU and its member states. This is where cohesion policy plays a crucial role. As one of the EU's main investment policies, as many stakeholders confirm, it is fundamental for reducing disparities, promoting long-term convergence and closing development gaps. It should thus remain a well-funded priority of the European Union. A small note, when I became a Prime Minister in 2016, the buzzword that we used in my first government was basically catching up. And from a 62% of the average development of the EU level, after the 8 years and the intelligent use of national and EU funds, we have now risen to 76%, which means that we are at the level of the development that Hungary is currently, that joined the European Union 9 years and 3 months before us. For example, I am convinced that the investments could be even more directed to strengthening social cohesion and avoiding social fracture, especially protecting the most vulnerable among us in times of uncertainties and crisis. Cohesion policy can also contribute more to demographic revitalization of rural and other vulnerable regions, which is one of Croatia's strategic objectives and topics we put forward when we debated last strategic agenda. The demographic issue was put in the strategic agenda, and as a follow-up to that, we agreed with Ursula von der Leyen, that the President of the Commission, that Dubravka Šuica, first ever commissioner to have in its competence the portfolio of demography. Even though we all deem it as a national competence, we feel it's a horizontal issue and the problem for the whole continent, and therefore we should act more and allocate adequate funding to help member states addressing this serious issue of low birth rates across Europe. It could become a very good tool to address all democratic challenges, as Enrico has said in his report, the freedom to stay, as the negative demographic trends put at risk EU's overall growth and development. With regard to other EU instruments that can protect our citizens, the European Solidarity Fund, the EU Civil Protection Mechanism and the RESC-EU come to mind as those that should be further developed and prioritized. They provide a much-needed safety net, as clearly shown in my country's example when 4 years ago the capital Zagreb was hit by a devastating earthquake, as well as the region of Sisak and Petrinja. And that's where the EU SF helped us a lot, mixed along with the good use of the National Programme for the Resilience and Recovery. When it comes to the more influential Europe globally, we believe that this future EU budget should be enlargement-proof. In the shorter term, the EU budget will need to reflect the gradual integration of candidate countries into our markets and help them achieve EU standards and good levels of economic convergence well before accession. Looking further ahead, we will need to assess and take into account the impact of enlargement on the financing of our policies. We will need to achieve a balanced way of adapting EU policies in order to ensure and maintain the immediate positive effects of existing member states and at the same time allow new countries to participate in the implementation without negative consequences. Ukraine facility and the growth plan for Western Balkans are good examples of well-structured and predictable financing based on the reform plans and related investments. However, we will go into more detail on this when we embark on the complex discussion on the EU's internal reforms, which need to go hand in hand with the enlargement preparations. I would also like to mention two more priorities. Our external instruments need to be even more streamlined, strategic and aligned with our foreign policy, development and international partnership objectives. Global gateway should be more accessible to all, and we need to make better care of our security and defense by strengthening our defense industry, pooling resources and avoiding fragmentation. From structure, I would like to turn now to the sources and modes of financing of our budget. As the future EU budget should be more targeted and streamlined, its financing should contribute to a simpler, more predictable, fairer and more transparent system of EU revenues. Recent crises have also revealed the need to increase the capability of the EU budget to adapt to changed circumstances. How can we do that? Our twin transition, for example, will require significant funds by blending more public and private funding and by using all available instruments at our capital markets, we would be able to do more. But we need more political willingness at the EU level to do so, while also carefully examining the potential of possible new own resources, as was suggested by the Commission, as Johannes has already said at the beginning. Secondly, we could consider building on the success of the recovery and the resilience facility model, which gave the necessary boost and support to our economies and stimulated reform-related investments. Croatia is a good case in point. We are now only the second member state to have submitted the fifth payment request, while receiving positive assessment that all reform and investments indicators were successfully fulfilled in each of the previous disbursements. Such performance-based framework for financing key policies and related reforms is certainly something to be explored for the next programming period. We should also consider more adequate flexibility tools that would allow for more efficient management of pressing financial needs resulting from any unexpected events. Ladies and gentlemen, approaching the European elections in June, we need to be reminded of the EU's founding fathers' original idea, that the EU would be a continuously developing project. They anticipated changes and new challenges. In the current, radically changed geopolitical and global economic environment, it is now the right time to follow suit and take yet another strong leap forward in the EU's history. By taking bold decisions, adapting our priorities and strengthening our capacity to act, including through our EU budget. As you might recall, a guiding motto of the first Croatian presidency of the Council in 2020 was "A strong Europe in a world of challenges." This message is still echoing in my ears and is even more relevant today. After all the crises and unprecedented challenges we witnessed in the meantime and will continue to witness in the future, I believe the EU budget is a key instrument to build on that message and fulfill the needs of the EU and our citizens. So let's make the future EU budget a steady guarantor of the EU's resilience, prosperity and sustainable development, with the principles of unity, solidarity and convergence at its core. Beyond being a financial plan, the EU's budget is a geopolitical tool, which we should utilize to make Europe stronger and more competitive on the global market, more secure and equipped to protect our citizens and their way of life, and more influential when cooperating with partners beyond our borders. The years ahead will be demanding. Some challenges are predictable, others will still surprise us. To face them, we will have to be clear on our priorities and firm in how they are reflected in the long-term budget. In this way, the EU budget will manifest the intended narrative of the Union's future and underpin the EU's core values. It must be a bold plan, but one based on deliberate and jointly made decisions on how we want to craft the future in an uncertain and constantly evolving world. A more assertive Europe is not an isolationist or confrontational Europe. It is a Europe more attuned to the economic and geopolitical realities, adopting more agile and innovative policies and instruments. I believe the EU is up to the task. I am convinced we can successfully navigate this new reality and do so through unity and collective action. Thank you very much for the invitation and opportunity to address you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister.